beautiful day in the garden today. I'm Liz Davey, and you're watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable in Norfolk, Massachusetts. We are in mid to late October, and we still haven't had a frost, although the last few nights have been a bit chilly, and there are a few more chilly nights to come, but then the temperatures are going to go back up. So we may escape a heavy frost for a while yet, unlike our Midwest neighbors who have already experienced a little snow. Now, I'm in my herb garden, and you can see fall is definitely falling. It's falling all over, from the trees, the pine trees, the maple trees. The oaks are still hanging on to their leaves, as they usually do, until sometimes even next spring. I'm trimming back only a few things in the herb garden, and I'll probably rake over it once to make sure I didn't miss any of my plant labels, which I pick up and put away in the shed for the winter, or any other little garden items that I don't want to leave out for the winter. But for the most part, I will leave the leaves covering the garden, and they will start to decompose and add a little nutrients to the garden, as well as protecting some of the plants. Again, some of them I can trim back, and that would be something like this lime balm. I have lemon balm and lime balm, and I'll just cut this off at the base. It makes removal of leaves easier in some of the areas. And it is not a native plant, which I like to leave any native plants, but this is not one of them. But I'll just continue to cut this plant down. I'll also cut back my oregano and tarragon. But some of the plants need to be left until spring. This is a southern wood, and we'll leave that one until spring. It is a half-hardy perennial, meaning that it will kind of die back, but it resents being cut back until spring. And then in the spring it'll pop back up, and I can trim it off. The same is true of the rue. And one caution with rue, if you do decide to cut it back, and I can cut off the stalks that bloomed, but I'll leave the rue, again, half-hardy. The sap of the rue, if you're working in sunlight, as we are today, can cause a rash. And so you want to be careful with rue to work with it wearing gloves and out of full sun. And be sure to wash well if it contacts your skin. Some people are much more sensitive to it than others. Again, I want to leave my sage because I'll be picking it, probably for my Thanksgiving stuffing. And I also need to leave lavenders all over. I have some in the herb garden and some in the flower garden, and those will stay until spring, when I can cut those back and trim them up a little bit, taking off only the dead foliage. Most other things do get left. The rose, I've got my Rose officinalis, has got some little hips on it. It doesn't make impressive hips, but there are a few orange rose hips on it. The birds will take care of those later on, I'm sure. Over here I have an annual, which is my lemon verbena, one of my favorites, and I'm going to trim that back. Actually, I'll even take it right out because it is an annual and it definitely won't come back. In the meantime, I'll pick what's left of it, the green, and take it in. It's a lovely lemon odor and also flavor herb. And what I'll do is dry this. It makes a lovely tea in the winter with a little honey. It makes a marvelous lemon tea. So all of the lemon verbena will get cut back and brought inside. The chives will go, and those will actually rake out either in the fall or the spring. I could still pick a few chives if I needed a few for a garnish, so I'll probably leave them yet for a while. Mints can also be cut back, and the fennel can be cut back. It will come up in the spring again. Of course, any things that's still green I tend to leave. Thymes, I have a lemon thyme, I have lime thyme, English thyme, and those will be left. They don't get cut back at all because they tend to be evergreen completely. Now let's move over to the Perennial Garden. The Perennial Garden is still going a bit. This is a Eupatorium chocolate. The foliage was a darker color during the season, and now it has become more green and it's blooming. The blooms are a little bit like ageratum, only on steroids. It's a taller plant, white blooms. They are nice. They can be picked and added to flower arrangements. And the Boltonia, which is in back, was a white daisy, almost looking like an aster, and it has pretty much finished blooming. This is a Montauk daisy, and around town you see some Montauk daisies blooming. This one I don't think gets enough sun, and it may need to be moved in order to encourage it to bloom a little better. So far, no blooms on that this season. It also suffered quite a bit from the drought, and that may have a lot to do with it as well, because this area does not get much added water in the summer. I'm going to leave most of my perennials standing, except some of the non-native ones I will take down. The insects that are necessary to the ecosystem and help feed the birds do need a place to rest for the winter, and the plant stems, spent plant stems, are a place where they can do that. So most of these things will stay standing. I do have some phlox over here that is, and we'll pick another one of these up. I'm going through and doing that. The phlox has some mildew on it, and it still has a few flowers, but this I will not put in my compost. Anything that has mildew or any other signs of disease will be actually trashed or put in an area where I will never be using the compost. I have a couple areas that are just kind of long-term compost, and this could be added to that area. One of the things that I do cut back are the iris, and they don't like to have wet on their foliage, so it's always good to cut them back. This is a miniature iris, but I'm going to just cut these back to just almost above the ground and get rid of the foliage, and then I'll dig down and clear out the area around them and keep that clear for the winter, and also keep the leaves off of the iris to help prevent disease. And again, just clipping the plant back. You can use a rake if you have a large swath of iris. Go through and cut. I find scissors work better than clippers when cutting things back like grasses and iris. They just seem to do a quicker, better job. But we'll just pick all this up and leave this area bare for the winter. And there's old stems and leaves in there as well that need to come out. This is a Siberian iris, and it still has the pods that have dried. And I'm going to be picking these, just cutting them off, and I'll save them for winter decorations. And I'll probably spray a few of them with gold or silver paint, or even white, and they can be added to greens and give a little different structural accent to flower arrangements. So I'll be just cutting some of those back and bringing them inside for the winter. And they're all cut back, and I want to cut back these Siberian iris as well. Now, the next thing we need to do is dig up some of the non-hardy plants that we want to save for the winter. And this is a dahlia, and this dahlia did not bloom this year. Again, it was some small dahlias, but they did put up some nice foliage, and I will save them and replant next year. So what I'm doing is digging them. These were planted late. There we are, and here's another piece that can be pot up. This one is no good. Clearly, something has gotten at it, but these are very good, and I'll trim the foliage off after we've let these dry in my shed for a few days. And once they're dried, I'll cut the stems and store these over the winter inside in a very cool room, or a cellar. A cellar would be preferable, but inside a room, and cool room for the winter. I'll remove any that are damaged, and there are a few that seem to be, and those will get tossed out, but any good tubers can be saved and replanted in the spring. Now that we have an open spot, I'm going to dig down and plant a few tulips. I'm planting today 5 pink tulips. They're Angelique, which is a late tulip. It's a double, and I like it quite well. And I'm going to plant 5 in a bunch in the same hole, and I'm about 6 inches down. I usually don't mulch it because I will have this area will be covered with leaves, probably from the oak trees, before winter really sets in. But if you have an area that's open, you might wish to put some leaf mulch on it or other type of mulch. Right now we have a few things in bloom going down the way. Sedum. And this I'll leave for the winter. Probably pick some of it, bring it in, dry it. If you bring it in right now, it tends to hold the red color that is taken on. Starts out pink and then it becomes a dark red, and eventually it does turn brown. When it's dried, again, it can be used in arrangements, and it also looks nice mixed in with Christmas greens outside. It holds up pretty well. This is one aster plant, which is really outperformed this year. It's I think Autumn Skies. Let's see, I can look at the label and I'm not seeing it. Let's check it. It's a native aromatic aster, and it's a native plant. It's been covered with bees, honeybees, bumblebees. Right now we have a number of bees and native bees and pollinators. There are many, many more bees besides bumblebees and honeybees. Honeybees are not native, but we do depend on them for a lot of pollination. I'm leaving the seed pods, at least for a while, on the black-eyed Susans. The chickadees particularly love to come and perch on the seed pods and have a quick meal. We have going to seed the butterfly weed, and that can be picked. And again, we did some of this last month, and I'm continuing to collect it. The seeds are all attached to a lovely dispersion structure, which flies away and disperses the seed into the air, and they have many seeds, and hopefully a few of them will take root. That's how they spread. Moving down the way, this is a peony. I have several peonies. It looks the worst for the wear, the summer being over, and again, that's one that appreciates being cut back all the way to the ground. It helps keep it healthier if you completely cut it back. Some of these items will be cut down. Again, another Siberian iris that will get cut back. And another reason to cut back some of these items is because I have this area filled with spring bulbs, and they will be coming up March and April, early May, and it's nice to have things removed so that you can see the bulbs. And a lot of these will, like the Siberian iris here, will lay very flat and cover up any bulbs that might be underneath. Verbena bonariensis. We're used to lower verbena, and the kind that you put in your arrangements that is an annual, which blooms very nicely in window boxes and flower pots. This is a more perennial variety. It has a little tall stalk and these little short purple flowers. This one's going to seed, starting to go to seed. I've let a number of them go to seed throughout the garden, and they come up here and there, and I kind of like them. They're what I would call a see-through plant because you can kind of see through them to the other things. They don't take up a lot of space, but they are kind of pretty, and that you can cut those again for arrangements. And here we have iris in October. No, iris season is not October, but this is what's called a reblooming iris, and There are several varieties of reblooming iris. Most of the iris does bloom in May, June, but this one is called Immortality, and it is one that will occasionally rebloom in our area if the conditions are proper. And this year, with the rain and warm weather we've had late into the season, lo and behold, I have one stalk of iris in bloom. A very welcome sight amidst the browning and yellowing leaves of fall. Now I'm going to proceed down to the vegetable garden and do some harvesting and planting. Many of your vegetable gardens may be completely gone at this point. Mine's still going strong. Not with peppers and beans and tomatoes necessarily, but with another group of crops that like the cooler weather. And I'm still picking things like broccoli. This was broccoli that I took off the initial head of broccoli, and now I can pick side shoots that are coming up. I tend to cut it up before I serve it anyway, and some of the side shoots are pretty large. Others are a little smaller, but I'm getting quite a lot of broccoli this season now that we've had some rain, and I've been spraying it with the insecticide. This is an organic insecticide to help with the caterpillars because the little cabbage moths are still flitting around, spreading their eggs. And we'll pick a little more here. But I've been able to freeze some broccoli for winter by just blanching it slightly in the microwave. I also have what's called perpetual spinach, and this is also putting up some new leaves in the middle. This is a chard type product, but its flavor is more like spinach, and you can use it in any dish in place of spinach. You'll just want to cut off any of the midribs that are on the plant. I fold it in half and cut the midribs out, and then use it just as I would spinach leaves in any type of dish. The Brussels sprouts are going to be at their best after a frost, so we're waiting to pick those. And you can see there, now that we took the tops off, the sprouts are sizing up nicely, and it looks like we're going to have a nice crop of Brussels sprouts about next month. Another crop I have is celery, and you'll see I've got a cover over it. We are, again, threatening frost, and to try to keep my last two patches of broccoli going, I've covered it, although I can trim it, and you'll see I have a nice head of broccoli, or of celery. Did I call it broccoli? No, it's celery. And celery grows here. It grows very nicely, especially if it has enough water. And this rivals your grocery store, produce market celery. And it will keep in the refrigerator about as long as the one from the grocery store, perhaps a little longer because it's fresher. I have other greens to pick too. We like arugula, which is a peppery green, but it makes a lovely salad with apples or pears, and a little maple vinaigrette, maybe a little blue cheese or feta cheese. And it is very hardy. It will still be going when we get a frost. I also have parsley, and I'll be picking my parsley. I have already some, but I'll be picking this. And I store this. I'll wash it and just let it dry a little and pack it in glass jars. Glass jars are the important thing here. You shouldn't touch plastic or it will start to get very gummy and nasty. But if you keep it in a glass jar in the refrigerator, it will last probably until Christmas. So several months at least. I have a few carrots and a late planting of bok choy over here, along with some more arugula and a few nice little heads of bok choy, which is good in stir fries, and some late lettuce. Again, lettuce is a cool weather crop, and if you planted some in early September, you should be getting a little lettuce at this point. I have a few beets and a few carrots left to harvest as well, and plenty of kale a little further down. This is my last planting of kale, and it's just starting to be useful. But I have 2 other plantings that are still going, so I have plenty of kale as well. Incidentally, going back to the parsley, I will be leaving the parsley in the garden over the winter and covering it with a little straw, and hopefully in the spring I will come out, remove the straw, and the parsley will come back up, and I will have an early spring crop of parsley. Parsley is a biennial. It grows from seed the first year. The second year it comes up again in the spring and then goes to seed. I have some that went to seed down at the other end of this row, and I'm hoping that it's seeded enough that I will have new parsley growing from those seeds this year. But this parsley I will cover, and hopefully we'll get a spring crop from it. The next thing I want to do is do some planting. And as you can see, I've got my little battery operated blower out here. I keep digging a trench to plant the garlic, and it keeps filling with leaves. So if you're in that predicament, this works really well to just get the leaves out of the trench so that you can plant it without burying leaves. And I purchased some new garlic. I can also use garlic that I saved when I harvested it in July. I've got that in mesh bags. We've been using it, but I can use a couple of the cloves to replant. And basically, the seed garlic is just a head of garlic, similar to what we harvested. And there are many different varieties, and I just separate the cloves out, and about 6 inches apart, I'll plant them 3 or 4 inches deep, sometime in October. And you want to put the root side down. And this has 2 smaller cloves, which I'll separate. When you buy seed garlic, they vary in the number of cloves per head. The one I just planted, which was a hardneck purple stripe, and that the purple stripe is the cover, has some smaller cloves. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 cloves to the head. So that's 10 new plants. Another variety that I purchased to try is a hardneck porcelain. And this makes bigger heads, but it has fewer cloves. There are only 4 cloves in this head. So that will make 4 plants. So it depends which kind you have, how many cloves you'll get to plant. And then we'll just cover this up and pat it down. And I'll continue planting this row with both varieties. And then I'm going to mulch it with some straw. Easier to do once I take the string off. That helps me get a row that's reasonably straight. But I'll put some straw on it. We'll also put some straw on the strawberries for the winter. And I will mark the row out. My strawberries have expanded a little bit, and I want to keep the row at 4 feet wide because I can only reach in about 2 feet to pick. So I can pick 2 feet on each side. So 4 feet for me is a good, if you have a longer reach, you can have a wider row. But for me, 2 feet in and on each side is a reasonable distance. So I'll limit my row to 4 feet. And I will put in some strings to that effect. Sometimes we plow the garden up in the fall. Other years we wait until spring. It just depends on how long the season of fall lasts and how soon winter comes after that first frost that kills back many of the things that are here. I still have a few flowers, and you'll notice I'm not decorating for Halloween. I'm covering my dahlias, and you'll see the dahlias when we go inside, but I've been picking them because they are a little late this year, but dahlias are extremely susceptible to frost, and with the next few nights cool, and a cool wind can blow right in here and end my dahlia season rather quickly. We have a few days that are cold, and then we'll have a few days that are warmer again, so I may get some more dahlia blooms from this group. But right now I've covered it. Now let's head back to the shade garden and the pond and see what's happening there. You can see I've put the net over the pond. I have a net that I hold down around the edge with rocks and bricks, and it helps keep some of the leaves out of the pond. I had an old sprinkler tripod. I suppose a camera tripod would work as well if you happen to have an old one. And I use that to support the netting a little bit so that it doesn't fall into the water. And it holds the leaves. And then I do use my little blower and try to keep some of them blown off the top of it a little bit. Ultimately, I will be removing the net once we've picked up a lot of the leaves around it. The fish are doing great. I'm using the spring and fall food now, which is a little easier for them to digest with the water being colder. And as soon as the temperatures drop even more, I'll stop feeding them anytime. And I can just throw this through the net. It's small pieces and it goes right through, and they pop up to consume it. I still have my waterfall running, and within the next few weeks, after we've cleaned up the leaves, I will be removing all of the waterfall, and I store that inside for winter, the filter and the waterfall. And then once the pond starts to freeze, or it's going to be threatening, I will plug in the heater, and this keeps a hole in the ice for the winter. You need to exhaust the air and the water a bit. Gases form when you have fish in the water. I've picked up most of my planters. I still have a few because they're still blooming. This is a begonia, and I had a hanging begonia here. It's now in the garage drying out so that I can store it. This one I will also store for the winter. It has a bulb underneath, and I'll probably just cut off all the foliage and store the whole pot inside for the winter, bringing it out in the spring. Anything in a terracotta or clay pot or porcelain pot that you have outside, you need to bring those pots inside. They will freeze, water will get in them, they freeze and they crack. So anything like that goes right in the shed. On the other hand, plastic pots can stay outside, and I just stack those so that they don't collect water. My shed stays really warm. It's almost 80 degrees in here today. I have a plexiglass window on the other side of it, and it really heats up nicely. It's a fun place to work in the winter, putting together some winter decorations when the sun is out. And I'll be doing that later on. But for now, we keep the door closed and keep it warm. I've repacked the shed, putting in some of my garden furniture and most of the items I have in the garden, plant labels, anything that I can fit in there actually that I don't want to leave out for the winter. Now let's go up by the patio, getting my bird feeders ready to go. And when my hanging plant comes down, it's actually putting on some blooms, which was kind of a surprise. It's certainly not a full bouquet as it once was in the spring, but it's amazing how a little water and a few warm temperatures bring out the verbena and the petunias again. So once this is gone, and I will not attempt to save it from frost, the bird feeder will be filled and go up. Over here I'm still harvesting peppers. The little matchbox peppers that I planted here, we started these from seed back in, I think it was February, and they have just done wonderfully. This gets full sun, it's nice and warm, and I have lots of these little red hot peppers. But as you can see, I have lots and lots of them. And now we're going to go inside, and we're going to save these, and we're going to use these for one of the projects that I'm going to do inside. And we're also going to cook a nice fall dinner. I have a few tasks to do inside, or if it's a nice day, you could always do these in the garden shed or at the potting table. But I've been collecting seeds as the plants make their seeds throughout the season. And I have a number of cups of seeds, and I use paper cups, plastic cups, little custard cups, whatever I have handy at the time to collect the seeds. And I even sometimes put them on paper towel. And I have some pepper seeds here that I took out. A friend gave me a pepper last spring, and I planted it in my garden, and it did extremely well, and I got some wonderful red peppers, peppers and green peppers from it. And I decided, and she told me that she had saved the seeds the year before from peppers, and that this pepper plant came from the seeds that she saved. And I thought, well, I think I'll save some of the seeds from one of those peppers for next year. So I've let them dry on a paper towel, and they're now ready. And I'm going to put the seeds in envelopes and label them, and then put them away until it's time to plant next spring. And what I'm using are coin envelopes. And these are available online. They're fairly inexpensive, and they work really well for seeds. They are paper. Plastic tends to hold any moisture. These will let it evaporate, and you want to keep your seeds dry. So I'm going to just put these peppers in here. And we can seal it up. These seal quite well. And then I want to make sure I label it with the variety. And I'm going to call this Jill's Peppers. And the date that the seeds were saved. So there we have one of them done. And I'm going to do the same thing with flower seeds that I've saved. Now, some of the seeds are very easy, like poppies. You just kind of shake them out. So they are very easy. And again, to seal those, these are pink poppies. Some of the seeds have fluff, but if you shake it a little bit and work with it a little bit, you'll find that the seeds all go to the bottom. Then you can just save the seeds that are in the bottom of the cup. And that's true of the straw flower seeds. Speaking of straw flowers, I've been collecting them when they're almost in bloom. And some of these are fresher than others. They're still blooming in my garden, or were. And what we'll do is cut off any leaves when there's a bunch of straw flowers, and just let them dry until they're very dry. And then I can put them away in a box or envelope. And if you have whole straw flowers, look, there's some here that are quite large. Instead of saving the bunch, and these have dried quite a bit, I can just pull the leaves off, and then I'll just take the stems off. The stems really don't dry well if there's too much stem. And if I want to use these, I'll use a wire in order to hold them up in a vase. So I'll cut off any of the extra matter. You can see how they're floppy already. So we'll just cut off some of that. And you can also glue them onto things. They make nice little decorations. Wreaths, add to wreaths. And this one is kind of half out, but still quite pretty. And it's, again, I'll take off much of the green foliage before I store them away. So we'll have most of them without any foliage or leaves. The next thing to do inside is with peppers. And I've had a bumper crop of these matchbox peppers. And these are little, very hot, little red peppers, which are extremely decorative as well as being hot and edible. A lot of the peppers that you buy right now for your fall arrangements are not edible. They're considered decorative only. These are ones I grew from seed, and they are indeed edible. And they also dry quite well. So what I'm going to do is string them. And I started out by, instead of knotting the thread, I just tied on a pepper. And I'm going through the top of the peppers with a needle that has a large eye in it, so it was easier to thread. And just go through the peppers, and we'll make strings of peppers. And I can hang these and let them dry. And then you can use them. Nice to add to things like beans that you're cooking, if you're cooking dry beans, just to add a little heat or a little flavor, not much heat. Or you can grind them for pepper flakes. But they also make just a nice decoration, or maybe even a small gift. So I'll just keep stringing peppers, and I can also make them into a circle if I keep doubling back on it and have a circular pepper decoration. Very easy to do. Now let's go into the kitchen and see what we can do to make a fall meal. Today I'm going to make soup. It's been a little rainy of late, and it's starting to get a little cool. We're expecting a frost very soon, if not having had a slight frost already. But it's coming, and this is, to me, soup season. And so today I'm going to be making what's called meatball chowder. And I need to get them out of the refrigerator, the ones I've already made, and starting. And the first thing for this recipe is to make meatballs. And what I need to make are meatballs using 2 pounds of ground beef. And to that I would add a couple teaspoons of seasoned salt or a low salt seasoning replacement. Mrs. Dash is the one I use. 2 eggs, a few shakes of pepper, black pepper, 1/4 cup of parsley, a couple tablespoons of milk, and 1/3 cup of bread or cracker crumbs. I use the panko crumbs because that's what I have, but other crumbs would work just fine. That makes your meatball mixture, and then there's the question of cooking the meatballs. Now, the original recipe called for coating them in flour and cooking them in oil in the frying pan, and that does not make for a quick meal in my estimation. So you can also do meatballs in the oven. Just put them into a flat pan with a little that's been greased and cook them in a 350 oven until they're done. But I like to cook them in the microwave. And what I do is I put the meatballs into a Pyrex pie plate or any other container that will nicely go in the microwave. This works well because you can make them in a circle. And I'll put wax paper on it, and then I'm going to go over and put it in the microwave for 5 to 6 minutes. Depends on your microwave. Mine has a turntable, so they'll be ready in no time. And these are ones that I have already cooked, again, in the microwave and put in the bowl to have ready. Now, for the soup itself, this is an easy recipe. It just has a lot of ingredients. And we're going to start out with 6 cups of water. And then I can put the water container away. And we're going to add a lot of vegetables. And I've sliced carrots, and again, I use my food processor to slice up about 6 carrots. The food processor works really well for slicing something like this, or you can do them by hand. They've been peeled, washed, and sliced. And about 3 potatoes, and I'm going to drain these. I've prepared them already. If you prepare potatoes ahead of time, put them in cold water and they'll set without turning brown. Otherwise, you'll get your potatoes starting to turn color. So this is 3 smaller potatoes that have been diced. Again, some of the vegetables in this are things that you can kind of fudge a little bit. 1 more carrot, 1 more potato, 1 less. It probably won't make much of a difference. I'm also going to add about 3 or 4 sliced onions, and my onions were pretty large. So I've cut up the onions. They've been diced. And again, you could use less if you wished. And then we're going to add tomato juice. And I have some here that I have canned. I'm going to add 1/4 of my tomato juice. And I'm going to turn on the heat already. And then it calls for 6 cups of tomato juice. So I'm adding 2 more cups of V8, which we happen to have on hand. And then we need to add some seasoning. And I'm adding 2 bay leaves, and these are fresh bay leaves off my bay leaf plant. My bay leaf, of course, came in for the winter. And a tablespoon of sugar, and 2 teaspoons of salt, and a teaspoon of marjoram, dried marjoram. Those are the seasonings in the soup. And we're going to bring that to a boil. I'll add, and then when the meatballs are finished, I'll add those. And we can stir that around. It's a tomato-based soup, lots of vegetables, and it freezes extremely well. So it makes a large batch, but there's enough to freeze for future meals. We're going to bring this to a boil, and after I add the meatballs and a cup of corn and some rice. Oh, okay, and bouillon. We're starting to cook it. And I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of this beef bouillon. And this is, you could also add 6 bouillon cubes. Each teaspoon of this is the equivalent of 1 bouillon cube. And it's, this is the lower salt version. If you use the full salt version, you may wish to not add any salt additionally until you've tasted it. We'll make sure that gets mixed into the liquid. So a beef and tomato base. And then I'll add a 1/4 cup of long grain rice. And the rice will cook as the soup cooks. And 1 cup of corn, or you could use a can of Mexicorn. That has some red pepper in it. You could add some red pepper to the soup too, but I'm using just a cup of frozen corn. And our meatballs are just about ready. And you see they cook very nicely right in the container. And we'll just put those right in, juice and all, as well as the ones that I had previously cooked. We'll add these. Now that our soup pot is pretty full, it's just a matter of letting this cook for about a half an hour until the rice is completely cooked and all the ingredients are cooked as well. And I will get out a spoon to give it a stir occasionally and a spoon rest. So you can see we have a mixture, and we want to make sure that we get that bouillon or the bouillon cubes dissolved or the bouillon paste. Now the next thing I'm going to make is an hors d'oeuvre, and I started it already, and I mashed 2 avocados with the juice of 1 lime and half a teaspoon of salt. By doing this in advance, it kept the avocado again from turning dark by adding the lemon juice to it. And now I'll add some other ingredients, and basically I'm making a guacamole. And this is one we like. It has a little more in it than just avocado and lime and salt. And it has 1 chopped plum tomato, half of a small onion, 2 cloves of garlic, and a bit of hot pepper. And I'll mix that in. And then I'll add some cilantro. Now, we like cilantro. If you don't like it, of course, you wouldn't be adding it. You did use some of those little hot peppers that we started on the string, too. But I mix this. This will make a nice hors d'oeuvre. And I need to add some cilantro. And for this, I'm going to use this cilantro that I can get at the store all season. I have tried dried cilantro from the store, and I do not like it. It tastes like dried grass. But this one isn't too bad. Fresh is best, but if you can't get fresh, this certainly will work well. And it is a cilantro paste in a tube that you can keep in the refrigerator for a while. And I'll add a good tablespoon of that to my guacamole. And this is going to be kind of a Halloween appetizer. I figured green looks a little spooky. So, and how I'm going to serve it is in a pepper, and I've cut a little face in the pepper. I don't know if you can see that or not. I hope you can. But I've cut a little jack-o'-lantern face in the orange pepper. And I'm going to fill my pepper with the guacamole for serving. Now I'm going to make some pumpkin tarts. It's pumpkin season. I have a nice little pumpkin right here that I picked from the garden, and this will soon be roasted and processed. I toyed with the idea of making a jack-o'-lantern, but since I don't have any small children home and seldom get any trick-or-treaters down here, I think I will just roast it and use it to make pumpkin pie instead. But these are going to be pumpkin tarts, and I've made the crust in advance, and the crust is probably one that may or may not be familiar to you, but it's a cream cheese pastry, which is very forgiving. It's easy to shape, and it comes out of the pan really easy. And to make 2 dozen little tarts, you need to combine half a cup of butter, 3 ounces of cream cheese, that's a small package of cream cheese, and 1 cup of flour. And you soften the cream cheese and the butter and mix in the 1 cup of flour. And this forms a dough, which you refrigerate for about an hour. And then you can form it into little balls in your little mini muffin pan. And this will make 2 dozen. I'm just doing a dozen right now, but it will make 2 dozen tarts. These are nice to serve anytime during the holiday season. Makes a light dessert instead of pumpkin pie, and they'll keep in the refrigerator for several days. Now we need to make a pumpkin filling for them. And I'm going to, again, I'm giving you the recipe for 2 dozen. And we want to have a half a cup of canned pumpkin, 1/3 of a cup of sugar, and I've added to that a 1/2 teaspoon of pumpkin pie spice. And if you don't have pumpkin pie spice, you can mix your own using cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger. Just combine the spices that you like, your pumpkin spice ingredients. And if you don't know what you'd like to use or what proportions, there are many, many options that are available if you just go online and look up pumpkin spice, and they will tell you how to mix it. It also comes available in a little jar. And then I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of sour cream and 2 tablespoons of milk. And I think I need this. And 1 egg, which has been beaten. And we want to mix this thoroughly, and this will be the pumpkin filling. And I'll fill the little tarts. These will go into a 325-degree oven for 30 to 35 minutes until the pastry starts to get a little brown on the edges and the filling is set. Now we need something else to go with the soup, and a nice loaf of bread is always a good thing to make. And because Halloween's near and it's fall, what I'm going to make is a pumpkin-shaped bread. These have been kind of all over the internet lately, and I've made up an oatmeal bread recipe that I did find online, and it is risen on here. I have risen it once, and then I reshaped it into a round and put it on the parchment paper. Now, the original instructions said to rise it in a bowl and then move it to the parchment paper, which has baking strings on it. And I've cut 4 pieces of string, 18 inches long, and laid them out on the pan so that they cross in the middle. So there we have our 4 pieces of string laid out, crossing in the middle, and this will make our pumpkin. So instead of raising it in a bowl and then trying to get it out of the bowl and onto the parchment paper with the string, I decided to do the second rising right on top of the parchment paper with the string underneath without moving it. I thought that would be much easier, and it is. So now we want to tie these in the middle, loosely. You don't want it too tight because the bread is going to rise a little more when you put it in the oven. We'll cut off the strings, and I need to pull this one a little through. And again, I did oil the string. I put the string into a little custard cup or dish and poured a little olive oil on it and kind of mixed it around to oil the string so that it wouldn't stick to the bread and it would be easier to remove after we've finished baking the bread. And the last thing I want to do is carve a little design in the bread. This hopefully will stay in the bread. And I'm using a sharp little knife. If you have a razor blade or a special tool for this that bread bakers can use, you may. But I'm just going to make a little design and hope it stays in the bread. All right, now our bread, which has risen already, is ready to go into the oven. And I have already heated a Dutch oven in the oven. This is one I inherited from my mother and my grandmother, and I use it quite a lot. And it's very hot right now. It's there's nothing in it. It's just heated up in the 350-degree oven. And I'm going to put the bread in, paper and all, right into the Dutch oven. This is parchment paper, and it will be fine. And we'll put the lid on. And that goes into the oven for 40 minutes. Our soup is baking and our bread is in the oven, and it's time to finish those pumpkin tarts that we started earlier. They've already baked and they've been chilled. They stayed in the pan for about 5 minutes, and then they come out very easily by just using a knife and going around the edge in the pan to remove them to finish cooling. I've made some cream cheese frosting. Again, equal amounts of cream cheese and butter, softened, and then add confectioner's sugar to the consistency that you want. It depends, of course, on how much cream cheese and how much butter you have used. But it makes a nice frosting with a little vanilla added. And I'm going to pipe some on top of each of the pumpkin tarts. Now, if you wish, you could also use whipped cream on these, but the cream cheese icing is quite good on them. And I'll just pipe a little on the tops, and then I'll finish it off, because it is near Halloween, with a little candy corn. And that'll be our dessert for the day. And when everything is finished, let's go into the dining room and enjoy our fall supper. Okay, we have our fall meal, which starts out with our guacamole stuffed pepper, and I'm using some dark corn chips with this in honor of Halloween. These are the blue corn chips that are almost black in color, and I thought they would go well with the orange pumpkin and the green guacamole. This would make a great Halloween party appetizer. And in fact, almost all of these things would be great for Halloween. Our bread has come out of the oven, and you'll notice the lines and the pumpkin, and I used a cinnamon stick in the center. I cut the string. Remember, we knotted the string in the middle, so I used my kitchen scissors to cut the string and pull it out, and it came out very nicely because I had oiled it. The designs I could probably make a little bit deeper, but it does have a little design in it. And after I got it out of the oven, I put a little butter on the bread to keep the crust a little soft. If you want a harder crust, you need to, after you've cut your designs in it, brush it with some beaten egg, and that will give you a hard, shiny crust. I decided to go with a more matte pumpkin that isn't too shiny, and just put some butter on it after it came out of the oven. And then when it cooled, I put in the piece of cinnamon stick for a little stem. Thank you for joining me today on A Walk in the Garden with Liz Davey. You've been watching NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television in Norfolk, Massachusetts.